All right. Well, this is a primer on lawn care. If you have a reasonably healthy lawn, and if you don't, then it's going to be a step towards rehabilitating them. And the reason we put these two together was that the timing is coming up on the need to rehabilitate and the best time to do that. So we're coming right up on that. So we're going to put the two together. We're going to start off with the healthy lawn information and then go forward. You know, lawns are both favorably and unfavorably influenced by many, many different factors. And that's something that I lose track of all the time. That there's usually try to hone in on just one thing. And boy, that's just not the case. There are some real common ones that affect lawn health. The first being sun and shade. How much sun and how much shade. But also the soil is a big factor and how fertile the soil is. Quite often soil will make it or break it in terms of how well just about any plant performs, but especially turf. Air circulation is commonly overlooked. How much air blows across a certain area of sod. The slope is a big factor depending on how much your particular property goes from high to low. If you have dogs and children, the traffic level can make a big difference. And then also the species. A lot of times you hear the phrase right plant, right place. That also refers to turf grass. The expectations, and this is something that we see all the time, the expectations and the interest level of the homeowner may be kind of mismatched or are perfectly matched. And so that's something you need to think about as well. Are you looking for something that is beautiful, highly performing, sort of rivaling really great looking grass that you might even see on a golf course, sports field, or a high-end estate in a nice part of town? Or do you just need something green? Maybe you're on an acreage, or you just want something that you mow once a week. And that's fine too. Or do you want something in between? And that's one of the questions we ask people right away is, do you want something in between? What is your expectation? Some of the inputs that we provide for turf grass care, for lawn care, are things we do year in and year out, all the time, sort of pre-programmed. But many of them, in fact, more than the automatic ones, are as needed. Now, unfortunately, despite our best efforts, lawns just don't grow well sometimes because there are a lot of factors out of our control and they will languish. And so that's the second half of the program. But for starters, we're going to talk about 5 things. We're going to talk about an initial assessment, something kind of that we do every day, kind of a triage. And then we're going to talk about the real basics: water, fertilizer, mowing, and pests. So this is an assessment pick, both far away, the big grand scheme, and then the real close up. On the left is an actual photo that was sent to me by a client, and lawn was just doing terribly, but it was really good because we were able to take into account lots and lots and lots of factors. The air circulation that I mentioned, the slope, this land is sloped. It's a brand new area, so the soil is suspect. And of course, the sun and the shade. So those are all the different factors right there in that series of pictures. And then in the very close up, or the micro look, we've got a small yard, a big tree, and some really bad looking turf. In this case, the root of the tree is pulling a lot of water and nutrients out of the turf and the soil for the turf, and a lot of shade is being cast right in this area where it's growing so poorly. So a lot of competition. Here's some more assessment. Again, sun, shade, wide open sun, and then on the left side, on the right-hand side, really heavy shade. In fact, so much shade that the turf grass does not grow well. So we've gone to ground covers instead. I can also introduce the concept here of separation of turf and ornamentals on both of these images. They've done a really good job in designing this landscape on the left to separate the two because they have such different requirements. We don't do any aeration, mowing, grub control, any of that kind of stuff on the ornamentals, typically the trees and shrubs being pictured here. And the turf is maintained very differently. So you can see the separation of turf and ornamentals kind of in an assessment mode. The air circulation, again, lots of air circulation on the left, not very much on the right. And if I remember right, the client on the right was saying they were having problems with a disease called powdery mildew because of poor air circulation. An assessment in terms of soil. Now, you've all driven around newer parts of town, and you can see the construction going on. And unfortunately, what happens in many of the cases is that not much in the way of soil improvement is done to a new property after the debris is removed. In fact, if some of the debris is removed, or all of the debris is removed, or none of the debris is removed, there's all kinds of different things that get left on site. On the right-hand side is an older property, and what you're seeing there is bad soil effects after the city had gone through and ripped up this area and then put poor quality soil back and then just sodded across the top. So that turf immediately, well, within a month or so, went chlorotic and started thinning out and started having all sorts of problems. So the soil has a dramatic effect on it. If you're fortunate enough to be building a home, I would highly encourage you to spend a little bit less money on the curtains and carpet and a little bit more on working some compost or some other form of organic matter into the soil. It's going to make a big, big improvement. And the best time to do it is at house building time. If you're not, if you're like most of us, you're going to be into a situation where you can get some improvement by doing lots of aeration and loosening of the subsoil that has been predominantly the area. Slope is a big concern, a big factor. When it rains or when you're irrigating, the slope is not going to be able to allow the soil and the sod, the turf, to absorb the rainfall or even the irrigation factor. So what we encourage people to do, if you're stuck with a slope that's pretty severe like this one, is that you work with the irrigation controller to alter the run times and the start times to develop what we call delayed starts. So you would water this area like 3 times, but for much shorter periods of time. And that's going to be something that's going to be very helpful to you, instead of putting it all on, watching most of it run off, and then not keeping it green enough. Traffic is certainly an area in the terms of assessment. You can trying to figure out exactly what's going on here. A lot of wear in this particular setting on the left, and then on the right, again, the kind of the microcosm or the smaller view, a lot of traffic injury, but this is from actually a mower wheel where this has been repeatedly mowed in the certain pattern, north and south, as this case is. And there was really no need to do much other than to loosen the soil a little bit and then start mowing in 4 directions rather than just north and south. And the problem went away. So it can be simple or it can be complicated either way. So that's kind of the assessment. Those are some questions you want to ask yourself if you're dealing with those kinds of issues. The water is one of the key things, and there are some take-home messages when you're dealing with watering turf. The first one is to keep roots moist, not soggy and not dry. We want moist but not soggy, and then we don't want dry, because you're going to end up with lots of problems. Moist roots are healthy roots. The second one is to water to the bottom of the roots, and we're going to show that in just a little bit. A couple of other ones that I've added, a couple other take-home messages, are sort of just acknowledgments. There's a tendency to sort of forget about or neglect or ignore turf at various times of the year. And when that happens, it's kind of like not eating for 3 weeks. You're going to be not giving the turf what it needs, or not putting on too much water, not putting on enough water, not really paying attention to how moist the roots are. And then also the other acknowledgement is that every irrigation system is broken. That's the whole point of Sarah's program that's coming up, is to look at the flaws in the irrigation systems that you might be using, whether they're in the ground or you're attaching a hose to the outdoor hose spigot. It doesn't matter. They're all broken. It's just a matter of how broken it is and how out of adjustment or out of alignment, or how out of what state of disrepair and to what extent they need to be fixed. So those are 4 sort of acknowledgement take-home messages. Here's what I was talking about with the depth of the roots. And this is somewhat species dependent. A lot of it depends on soil temperature. You can see my little note there in the very center of the screen on August. So this time of year, most cool season turfs, that would be bluegrass, tall fescue, perennial ryegrass, are at their shortest state just because of soil temperature. And, you're dealing with roots that have been killed through high soil temperatures. They sort of retract and they're at their shortest point. So if we're going to be watering to the bottom of the roots, we're going to be watering less heavily in the summer and more frequently in the summer, as opposed to the spring and fall, which you see on the left and the right hand side of this screen, where the roots are going to be growing deeper due to cooler soil temperatures for cooler season grasses. So that would be, again, for tall fescue, perennial ryegrass, Kentucky bluegrass. Now, if we're going to look at a warm season grass like Bermuda grass, which we don't grow a lot of, but if you were in Kansas, you might be growing some. But for us, primarily zoysia grass and buffalo grass, they're going to be exactly opposite. They're going to be very tolerant of warm season temperatures and high temperatures of soil temperatures in the root system. In fact, I reminded myself of this going all the way back to one of the sort of the historic researchers of modern turfgrass science, James Beard, who documented very extensively how well warm season turf grasses like zoysia grass and buffalo grass respond in the summertime when the soil temperatures are high. So the point of the slide is realize how deep the roots are and what point in the season you're at, and to water deeply and infrequently, which might mean twice a week or so, but very deeply in the spring and fall, and much more shallower and more frequently in the summertime. Now, I mentioned that we have problems with existing equipment. Here's a couple examples. I'm sure you've all seen broken equipment like this, geysers. And then on the left-hand side, on the right-hand side are sort of the results of that. You can see in the very far right of that slide, turf grass doing very, very well. And then on the left-hand side, the turf is just really shriveling up and drying because it's not getting any water. So something is broken with the irrigation heads on the right-hand side, not allowing it to come over to the left-hand side, or vice versa. There could be broken heads on the left-hand side that simply aren't spraying any water out. So this is why you want to dig a little deeper and find out what's going on. And the way you do that is through an audit. Now, when you say the word audit, people usually kind of freak out and think, oh my gosh, IRS audit. But this is the kind of audit that you want. And what we do is we run the sprinkler system and just take a good close look. And we have various devices that we use, but the most common ones are tuna cans, as you can see in the lower right-hand corner. Actually, that's a cat food can, and they work great too. You can use a little bit more precise devices that you can buy on the internet. These, I think I bought these for about $35. You get a dozen of them and you set them out in the pattern of spray. And you can tell they're both equally accurate. One time, one of our colleagues, Brad Jacobowski, and I did a comparison, and they're both equally accurate. It just maybe it's a little easier to read the one on the right, the one with the orange stand. You can see a couple of our master gardeners doing the audit on the left, and they're just using a ruler to measure how much water has been distributed. What you're going to find is that not everywhere gets the same amount of water. And those are the areas you want to work on first. People often ask us, well, how often should I run the irrigation system? 20 minutes, 4 times a week? Is that what I should be doing? And really, the best setting is off, not really to set it up so that it runs 3 times a week for 20 minutes, is to turn it off and then use a screwdriver to find out how moist the sod is. If you stick this thing in the ground and it comes back moist, you don't need to water. If you push it in the ground and it's crumbly dry, then you do need to water. So that's what's going to really help you here. This is what we're looking for. This is moist, not soggy, and not dry. And the low-tech approach is great. Sure, we can use all kinds of other approaches. We can use in-ground sensors, Rainbird, Hunter, Toro, they sell them. We can use the atmospheric ones that you would put in the gutter, and they measure electrical resistance. We can use weather station data, but there's nothing like measuring with this low-tech device in the very lawn you're trying to water. So this is really important to keep the roots moist. And you would want to check various parts of the lawn. You can't stick it in the middle of the lawn and assume the whole lawn is that same moisture level. You'd want to test about 5 or 6 places. If it comes up dry, you turn on the water for half an hour and then recheck. One of the things we do is also take different plants into account. And again, this gets a little bit more at the separation of the turf and ornamentals and the water needs thereof. You can see here on the left side, the plants surrounding the mailbox. And a lot of people do this, have mailbox plantings. A lot of those are for curb appeal, and that makes a lot of sense. So those might be high water requiring annuals. And then the plants in the background in a normal year, we usually don't recommend doing a lot of watering of trees and shrubs. In recent droughty months, we have needed to supplement that. But again, a lot of it depends on how moist that soil is. And then the turf grass in between. So on the left image, you can see 3 different zones of water need. And same thing is true on the image on the right. Unfortunately, this was a client that I visited that was watering the entire area exactly the same. All of this was being watered with the same amount and frequency. And you can see how lush the turf grass is, but how poorly the trees are doing. You see all the stuff on the ground around that tree. It's not mulch, it's dead spruce needles that are falling off because the trees are being overwatered. This is a basic time frame when it comes to fertilization as we shift gears over to fertilizer here now. This is some basic timing. This particular one is set up for eastern Nebraska. Sarah and I just wrote a new publication, and you can see the publication link there at the bottom of the page, so you can take a look at it. It's what's called a lawn care calendar. We got to talking a little bit, and a lot of us, you've seen some of our programming at farmers markets and Ask the Master Gardener tables and places like that. The most requested publication that we passed out was the lawn care calendar. So we decided to reformat it and update it a little bit, and now we've put this out. So quite often the lawns are looking great in the spring, and you don't need to fertilize them. In fact, the 2 most important time frames are late spring and late summer. So we're coming up on those times right about now. And then in some cases, you do need to do a light fall fertilization as well. And so those are the times. And then what you can see on the right-hand side is sort of the amount. Sort of the unknown secret there of putting on fertilizer is that if you buy a Fertilome or a Scott's or a Bayer or Ortho product, it's going to instruct you to set it on a certain spreader setting, and that's going to put out a full pound, a 1.0 full pound, which might be a little bit heavy depending on the time of year. So instead of that, we'd like you to calculate the amount that you put out with some simple math. So you're going to find out how much you want to put on and simply divide that amount by the concentration. So it's just a real simple division. For example, you're going to be putting on early summer 1/2 pound of nitrogen per 1,000 square feet using this product, this 21-5-12. So you just divide 0.5 by 0.2, and that's going to tell you end up with, you need about 2.5 pounds of that fertilizer product for every 1,000 square foot unit in your lawn. Well, it's pretty simple, pretty straightforward. You just need to weigh out, pour that in your fertilizer spreader, and make sure you apply that for every 1,000 square foot unit. Oh, but John, you say, I don't have 1,000 square feet. I have 5,000 square feet. Well, actually, you might have 4, you might have 6. So you need to calculate how much square footage you have. And that's real simple to do also. You simply decide, you break up the space into circles and triangles and rectangles, and go back to basic math again, length times width, or pi r squared, or 1/2 the base times the height. And you can figure out how much square footage you have, and then add it all together. On average, somewhere between 4,000 and 6,000 square feet for the average lawn. But you want to make sure that if you have a small lawn, you subtract out the areas that are driveways or vegetable gardens or pollinator plantings or whatever else isn't the lawn. And that way you know how much you're going to be applying. So it's pretty straightforward based on that calculation. One thing we do want to note is that the fertilizer is to be put on the lawn, not the concrete. And if I'm out exercising and going on a little bit of a walk, sometimes I'll be walking along and not noticing, all of a sudden noticing this crunching underneath my feet. We really encourage people. One of our colleagues, Kelly Fian in Columbus, has spent a lot of time with this and stormwater quality and making sure this stuff stays on the lawn, not on the sidewalk or the street, because we don't want it out polluting the water supply in any way. Okay, then the next basic is mowing. We want to make sure we're removing the top third of the mowing height with any one mowing. That's kind of the general rule. And if you mow and let the lawn grow taller, you're going to have deeper roots, but you may also have more problems with disease, a little bit more problem in the way of foliar diseases. If you more closely, you're going to have more problems with weeds. So kind of the happy medium, about 3 inches for bluegrass and about 3.5 for tall fescue, and just kind of let it go for that for the most of the year. And again, you have to keep the mowing height and the growth rate of the grass in mind a little bit, mowing a little bit more frequently when the grass is taller and a little bit less frequently when the grass is not growing as vigorously. And again, a good note here is keeping your mower blade sharp. We encourage people to mow it to sharpen the blade frequently. We encourage people to do this monthly and hoping they'll do it yearly. But if you don't have the equipment yourself, you can take this to a small engine shop and they'll fix you right up. There are 3 categories of pests that we talk about. We talk about weeds, bugs, and diseases. So on the left is one of the most common weeds we see in the grassy category. It's yellow crabgrass, smooth crabgrass. And then on the right, we see dandelions, plantain, clover, all kinds of weeds that you see on the left and on the right. In the spring, we try to control the annual grassy weeds with a pre-emergence application if you've had a history of it. If you haven't had a history of it, there's really no need to do that. And the same thing is true with the perennial weeds, making a fall application for dandelions. So we're about a month away from the key time or the prime time for making applications. There are a lot of different products: Speed Zone, Power Zone, Trimec, Weed Free Zone, Roundup for Lawns, a variety of these that will do a good job of controlling broadleaf weeds in late September. Bugs, we have 2 big.
John, can I ask you a question real quick?
Yeah, go ahead.
So one of our participants made the comment that some people or some homeowners don't consider clover to be a weed. So what would your thoughts be on that?
My thoughts would be, I would agree with the participant. And what we commonly suggest to people is that there are there are weeds, and then there are maybe levels of weed control. There are advantages to having some clover in your lawn because it sort of takes care of itself. It fixes its own nitrogen. In fact, the more you apply nitrogen, the more you have less and less clover. The thing about clover is clover can get a little bit aggressive and crowd out the desirable turf grasses to the point where you only have clover, which is fine. It doesn't have the traffic tolerance, and it doesn't have the ability to keep out other weeds as well as the desirable turf grasses. So there's pluses and minuses. It's a very good pollinator plant. The bees and other pollinators tend to really use it as a food source and as a nectar source, as a pollen source. So that's good. It's really in the eye of the beholder, and I think it's really about what you want from the lawn, and the lawn can be defined as a monoculture or it can be a mixed stand as well. So I would agree with the participant. Thank you for reminding me of that, as well as dandelions. If you have 4 dozen dandelions in your lawn, that might be too many. But if you have 6 or 7, that might be just fine. Because again, it gives you a little bit of interest and appeal, as well as providing a little bit of a food source for the pollinators. So a little bit is fine. It's where you get more than half. That's probably too much. So thanks for reminding me of that. The same to some degree is true for insects such as billbugs that you see on the right and white grubs that you see on the left. It's very common for us to see 2 or 3 grubs when you go to dig up something. But if you start to see a dozen grubs, then you know you've got a problem, and you can grab a hold of the sod and pull it back like a piece of carpet. If you grab a hold of the sod and it breaks off in your hand like it would on the right with the bill bugs, that's a bug that's very, very small, that's eating on the inside of the turfgrass plant, kind of like a borer on the inside of the turfgrass plant, as opposed to the grubs on the left, where you're just eating the roots of the turfgrass plant. They're both very damaging, but they eat in a different way. So those are just 2 things to keep an eye out for in terms of common insects. We're seeing these 3 problems right now in lawns. On the left is a disease that we've had for quite a while, primarily on bluegrass, called summer patch. And we usually see kind of big blighted areas, but with pockmarked areas of green, as opposed to the other 2 weeds we had before, or the other 2 problems we had before, with big areas that are not pockmarked with green. So these are big dead areas, whereas the summer patch works a little bit differently, or expresses itself a little bit differently. And it is primarily a root killer also, but it's the fungus that's killing the roots. On the right-hand side, we've just seen a ton of this, and a lot of it has had to do with the moisture we've been receiving the last 7-8 weeks. On the very bottom part of the screen, you can see, and I don't know if you can see my cursor, but right in this area, some lesions that are caused by brown patch. And these are on the tall fescue plants in the picture. And in the upper center, or I guess on the right-hand side, where I'm kind of making a circle with my cursor, that's a fungus disease and damage caused by dollar spot. Which is a disease that we see primarily on bluegrass. We've been seeing a lot of brown patch on tall fescue and a lot of dollar spot on bluegrass. These are typically not lawn killers. They just kind of make the lawn look a little bit ugly. So if you can stand it, we usually just let people ride out the storm with it, or encourage people just to wait. And when the environmental conditions change, you'll have less and less of the disease. So these are some of the things in terms of pests.
So John, a question on the insects. One of our viewers is asking, what is the best way to get rid of the insects you mentioned, and when?
Okay, so for white grubs, the best thing to do is to sort of inspect the turf and identify the fact that you have them. If you've got lots and lots of insects eating the roots, like what I showed in the photo, then you're going to be dealing with a choice between a curative action or waiting until the next year and doing a preventative action. If you have, it kind of depends on how many you have. If you have, dozens of them, it's probably best just to start over with what I'm talking about now, or going to talk about here in a minute or two on the languishing lawns. If you have a moderate number, like you count 7, 8, 9, 10, in a square yard, then it's probably a situation where a curative application of 7 or Dilox would do a good job of killing them and allowing the lawn to recover on its own. And then, since you know you have a history of that problem, then applying a preventative application the next mid-June. You could apply imidacloprid or acelepryn, and either one of those would do a good job of preventing the problem the next fall. Right about now is the time you'd want to be inspecting for them, because the grubs are hatched or starting to hatch, and they start becoming evident in late August, early September, typically. The bill bugs are kind of, once you see the damage, it's too late to do much. It has to be prevented the next spring. So the key, first of all, is identification, and then you manage based on what you see. So that actually gets us to our next point of the languishing lawn. If you see some sort of problem in the lawn and it's just looking really bad, and you're not really sure which direction to go, the first thing to do is an irrigation audit, making sure that the irrigation system is running up to snuff, that it's doing really well. And then after that, considering the bottom 2 lines, making sure you water to the bottom of the roots, and then also keeping the roots moist, not soggy and not dry. The third step for a languishing lawn is the right plant, right place consideration, counting the number of hours of sun per day. If you have 4 or 5 hours of sun per day in an area, pretty much wanting to go with tall fescue. Not going to have enough sun to grow Kentucky bluegrass. If you have full day sun, then you have the option of either Kentucky bluegrass or tall fescue, or you could consider zoysia grass or buffalo grass. And I'll show you, the last slide I have is a slide of buffalo grass for you to consider. So then the next thing would be to identify which of those disease problems that you might have, and to fix them, do some sort of treatment or plan for treatment. Also consider and fix any abiotic maladies like slope. And so if you identify that the languishing lawn as directly related to the slope, you could make some intervention techniques there for watering and fertilization, so that you're making sure the application of each goes on as uniformly as possible. And then the next step would be to assess and just ask yourself, how bad is it? Are we looking at about 1/4 of the lawn, either sort of scattered throughout as being bad, or is it more like 60 to 75% bad? Is a majority of the lawn weedy or dying from what other malady you might be having? Because that's going to help you take your next step. If it's a lawn that's kind of thinning, that's just a little bit weak, then probably just aeration and getting back on the schedule that you saw there in that publication that Sarah and I put up earlier that we wrote, will be what you need to do for a languishing lawn. If it's 40, 50, 60, 70% poor looking, then you're probably looking at a more extensive renovation. And that's what I'm going to describe coming up here. The first step is to create a seed bed, and that is best done through using a power rake. Quite often, if you just want to do a little bit better, you would use an aeration machine. That's going to be about 1/10 as good as creating a seed bed. So that's why I'm saying, if your lawn is really not that bad, if it's only 20% bad, then aeration and overseeding does fine. But if it's really bad, then you're going to want to start over. Basically, you're going to create a seed bed. In this case, what has been done is the bad part of the lawn has been sprayed with Roundup to clear out the undesirable grass and the weeds, and then power rake. You can see on the right-hand side a close-up of that newly prepared area. And that is basically as if you were going to be seeding a vegetable garden. You're going to get it down to the bare soil where a lot of bare soil is shown, and that's going to create a good seed bed. And you can really only do that with a power rake. Now, we don't recommend power raking unless you're going to be overseeding and renovating. That's not something we recommend doing, because you can see how extensive the damage from a power rake is, but it's the very thing you need if you're going to be doing some renovations and doing some overseeding. Got to get good seed to soil contact. When we do this, we like to prepare for that. What we've done in this area is worked in some compost. We've done the power raking, we've ripped out all the undesirable stuff, and then we've worked in, I think for this small area, which is about maybe a 10 by 20, about 6 or 7 bags of compost, and then work this in with a stiff rake. Works its way down into the soil and creates a great a place for those new seeds to drop into, as well as provide some nutrients. Then the seed in the spreader, you can use a drop spreader, or in this case, it's a rotary spreader. I like a rotary spreader for the even distribution of it. Unfortunately, because turfgrass seed is very light, it has to be done on a very calm day when we don't have the problem of the wind carrying the seed away. So the drop spreader works better if it's a little bit windy. If it's very calm, then I prefer the rotary spreader, which is going to give you great distribution across the area. It's really important to look at the label, and regardless of which brand you buy, which location you buy it in, you're going to want to look at the label and find out what the germination percentage is. You're going to want to find out if it has any crop seed in it, if it has any weed seed in it, and it's required by Nebraska state law in order for this information to be provided. Really, the weed seed should be at absolute none, and you'll see noxious weeds there. Crop seed can also be a tad bit of a problem, because crop seed can be a little bit misleading. It could be just about anything, and they can call it crop seed. So we want to have that very, very low. You might also see some sort of reference to what I see on the right-hand side called NTEP. Our university, the University of Nebraska, participates in the National Turfgrass Evaluation Program. And so if you see that on the label, that means these cultivars or varieties that are listed there perform well in that evaluation test. Some of you might be familiar with the All-America selections for like vegetables and flowers, and that's the same kind of thing. There are judges all across the United States. In fact, here in Nebraska, quite a few judges, a good handful of judges that evaluate flowers and vegetables for their performance. And the same thing is true. We have researchers at the University of Nebraska on campus that do the same thing, that evaluate different turfgrass varieties for their performance in this part of the country. And so if you see all that there, you know you're going to be in pretty good shape. So start with that as a core.
John, we have a few questions. Would you mind taking a break for just a minute for some questions?
Sure, I could use the break.
Yeah, take a hydration sip there.
Yeah.
So the first question goes back to preparing the soil.
Yeah.
And Michael is asking, is scarifying worth doing instead of power raking?
Okay, so scarifying is something you actually do to the seed itself. And you would not do that on bluegrass seed or fescue seed or ryegrass seed, but you might do that on buffalo grass seed. And you probably wouldn't do it yourself. You would buy it from a seed dealer who would sell you scarified seed. And what they're talking about is a little nick or cut in the seed, and they have a machine that does that. And the reason they do it for buffalo grass is that it's a slow germinator, and just about anything you can do to get it to germinate faster is better. We sometimes do that with like bean seeds, don't we, Sarah? Or
yes.
With some of the vegetable crops, we'll put a little nick or cut in them, and that helps them to absorb or imbibe water a little faster. But right. That would pretty much be exclusively for buffalo grass.
Okay. Then our next question from Brad is, from Bryce. If a yard is looking good, does it still need to be aerated every year?
Oh, that's a great question. The answer is probably no, especially on the age of the lawn. If it's an older lawn, and what I mean by that is if it's been a long time since the house was built, maybe 30 years or more, and you notice that the water soaks in pretty soon, like within an hour after you water, or after you irrigate, then no, you wouldn't need to do that. In fact, aerating does cause a small amount of damage because you're ripping out roots and, you're causing just a little bit of compaction with it. So no, you wouldn't need to if the lawn looks good and looks healthy. A lot of our master gardeners don't do it, but a lot of them do. It just depends on the lawn itself.
Okay. And Brad is asking, is overseeding simply spreading seed over existing lawn, or does it need to be drilled into the soil?
Okay, another good question. We typically don't drill seed for lawns. Sometimes we do that for pastures. We'll do it for acreages where you're planting bigger seeds and you have pretty bare soil. Overseeding as a term is really preparing the seed bed and then dropping it into an existing lawn that's been really roughed up. So that's overseeding. Drilling can be done, but usually it's in large areas. You don't typically drill unless you're dealing with large spaces. So for the average lawn, we don't think of drilling too often.
Okay. So we have another question related to aeration, John. How often should aerating be done? In this particular participant's instance, they had sod laid just over a year ago.
Okay.
So,
yeah, the answer to that is it depends. It depends on several things. First of all, if it's new sod this year in 2023, I would probably not recommend aerating it because what you want to do is make sure the roots get really, really well established. Now, if you had laid the sod in April and May, maybe you would do it in early October, but you'd really want to make sure the sod was well knitted down for the fear of ripping it up. If it was done last year, if the sod was laid last year, yeah, you could, especially if, and this is where the it depends part comes, if it was laid over the top of a lot of construction debris, a lot of heavy clay that was dug out of the subsoil in the basement and then distributed as part of the landscape. In the newer lawns, and again, by this, I mean 25 years old or less, and especially those 10 years old or less, need to be aerified much more frequently than older, mature lawns, because all the debris that falls off trees eventually works its way down into the soil and loosens the soil and adds nutrients to the soil and oxygen to the soil and eliminates the need for frequent aerating. So it kind of just depends on the age of the soil, how thin the soil might be, and your need for wanting to overseed.
okay, great. So Priscilla is asking, okay, for overseeding, what do you mean by roughing up the lawn to prepare it?
Okay, so what I mean is using a power rake to rip out, let's see if I can find it. Yeah, to create a seed bed, kind of like we see on the right, where you're looking at some turf grass plants, so maybe about 25% of what we see there is intact turf grass plants. So actually, they've been loosened pretty significantly, so they probably will end up dying anyway. But what we're looking at mostly there is the loosened upper layer of soil. You can do that with a regular rake, or there's special rakes called Cavex rakes. I can't remember if it's 1A or 2, Kaavex, or just Cavex. But it looks like the underside of a power rake with these really gnarly ninja-like blades that you have to be real careful with. You don't want small children nearby when you're using this, and it takes a lot of work. Boy, if you want to skip the gym that day, you're going to use a Cavex rake on your lawn. But essentially, what you're going to do is your arms and back are going to do the work of the engine that you see on the power rake here, and you're going to rip all this stuff out by hand. I highly recommend the power rake.
Yeah. So Dennis has another question about aeration.
Yeah.
Are pull behind tractor mower aerators effective? And would you do a slice or a plug?
Okay.
Or who would be a good resource about aerators?
So they can be effective. In fact, Sarah and I just attended a research field day where they were talking a really good presentation on aerators. The pull behind can be just fine. Pull behind a tractor. The important thing for most of our lawns is that we're going to want a plug. We're going to really get some benefit out of pulling a plug out. And actually plugs, when they put a core into the ground, an open core, the open tine goes in the ground, it actually kind of kicks a little bit and does a little bit of fracturing or loosening, especially if they're fairly new tines and fairly sharp. The slicing works well, but only provides very temporary relief. So if you wanted to just do a little bit of overseeding, like maybe get a little bit, like 10% seed to soil contact, the slicing actually would provide a little bit of that. In fact, it's done on some of the sports turf settings. It's not that common in a home lawn, although it can be done, but it's not going to open up it's not going to provide the seed bed that the aeration would, and certainly not what a power rake would.
Okay, great. So we have a couple more questions, one on diseases and one on weeds, but I'm wondering if you want to finish your presentation and then we come back to those.
Yes, because I think I've only got a couple more slides on the renovation part.
Okay, excellent. So Karen and Joan, we'll come back to your questions in a minute.
Okay. So once you put the seed in place, then this new product, we don't endorse any specific company, but this particular product that Scott's currently has a patent on, it contains the active ingredient of mesotrione. In some future year, it might contain the active ingredient of topramezone, which are products that will suppress the crabgrass seed, but not suppress the bluegrass seed, which is light years more effective than the old product that we used to have containing Siduron, which didn't really work all that well and was very expensive. This is not very expensive. Well, it's about $40 for this bag, which isn't, considering what it will do for you, it'll hold down a lot of crabgrass and foxtail and spurge and even dandelions. It'll do a lot of good work for you. However, be careful you don't use too much. This is the classic case of if an ounce is good, 3 ounces is better, because it will turn the new seedlings, they'll allow the new seedlings to come up, but it'll turn them white or pink. And while I think this is kind of pretty, it's not what you want for your new lawn. So use exactly what is called for on the label and no more. But this is a good product. It does a nice job of holding down the weeds that will germinate right along with your turfgrass seeds. And it'll also provide a little bit of starter fertilizer too. Then you got to keep it moist, not soggy and not dry. It's a little bit easier if you have a sprinkler system in order to do that. A month later, this is what you got. Now, this is an area on the right-hand side was a whole front lawn that was reseeded. On the left-hand side, just a small little 5 by 5 foot area that was reseeded. So either of those, this is a good time to start thinking about doing this kind of reseeding, whether it's a small patch or a large patch, either one. And as promised, I want you to at least consider the only grass that is native to Nebraska, and that's called buffalo grass. Sarah and I both have some extensive experience with buffalo grass from back to graduate school. This grass on the left-hand side is one of the varieties that there are 3 varieties that are kind of commonplace now: Sundancer, Prestige, and Legacy. And these are new introductions by some of our collaborators here, seed producers in the state. But it's a grass that is if you want very low maintenance, you might want to consider buffalo grass, or zoysia grass is another one. Now, these two are going to be about 4-month green, 5-month green grasses instead of 9 months that you get with bluegrass or ryegrass or fescue. But if you want a low maintenance lawn or part of your lawn that you don't have to take care of very much, if you're a traveler, if you're a traveling salesperson, then you might want to consider buffalo grass or zoysia grass. So just wanted to plant that notion in case some of you are interested in a lower maintenance grass. You might want to consider Sundancer, Legacy, or Prestige buffalo grass.